The National FAA Safety Team presents Non-Towered Airports, in control or out of control? This presentation is brought to you by three of us FAA Safety Team reps, my colleagues Brian Stamper, Lee Unger, and myself, Sarah Nilsson. So what's on the menu? The problem. There's been some bad behavior by pilots at non-towered airports. We're going to share some shocking video of a near miss in Marana. Then we'll dive into some NASA ASRS reports from other pilots and give you an example from Flying Magazine to show you this is a nationwide problem. After that, we'll share our solutions, why we made this training video, some CFRs, excerpts from the AIM, the advisory circular on point 90-66 Bravo, Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, and then some AOPA resources together with our Faasteam safety resources. But first, let's give away some freebies. All the sources mentioned throughout this presentation are free, and we have placed links for each and every one of them in the description underneath this YouTube video. Any pilot who has spent significant time flying around non-towered airports has probably experienced aircraft in the pattern without a radio, aircraft transmitting incorrectly, and aircraft choosing not to give position reports at all. Nearly 20,000 airports in the US are non-towered, compared to approximately 500 that have towers. While the FAA highly encourages radio reports over CTAF, published for non-towered airports, there is still no legal requirement for it. We'll begin with this shocking video, given to us graciously by Jessica Cox and Patrick Chamberlain. In the interest of time, I'm going to fast forward to the good part. Did you catch that? A Cessna 172 flies underneath Jessica's airplane at the 1445 mark. This pilot flew 100 feet below her. This video was but one example of bad pilot behavior leading to a near miss in the air. NASA ASRS reports show that these occurrences are all too frequent. While we are focusing on Marana in this presentation, it should be noted that this problem exists across the nation. Here is another excerpt. This one is taken from NASA's Aviation Safety Reporting System. As we landed on runway XX, still rolling on the runway, we noticed a Seneca landing on the opposite threshold, runway XY. Not once did they report their position as they were coming down to the airport. The aircraft landed and bounced a bit. We thought they were going around, but the aircraft came in our direction, ignoring us. We were forced to run into the grass to avoid a collision. Because this is a nationwide problem, major flight training magazines and blogs, as well as the FAA, have been very vocal on this topic. Here is another example. This comes from the March 2020 issue of Flying Magazine. And the title is, It's Called the CTAF for a Reason, and it's written by Christopher Watson. I've pulled a couple of little excerpts, which I'll share with you. Pilots who fly out of non-towered airports are nervous about talking to ATC. And pilots accustomed to flying in controlled airspace are anxious about flying into a non-towered field where there's no ATC to watch your six. Put simply, at non-towered airports, you and your fellow pilots function as ATC, but it's all voluntary. It only works if we accept and share that responsibility. Here's a direct quote from my colleague Brian. It occurred to me that there may be another systemic issue with all the training around Phoenix. Maybe it warrants a separate but related discussion about non-towered airport operations. My thought was about how dense the controlled airspace is around Phoenix. All the airports surrounding Phoenix are also controlled fields, with moderate to high volumes of traffic. Students at any of these locations have every move of every minute of their flight, controlled by someone sitting on their shoulder. From the time they start the engine, every turn during taxi, takeoff, directions to and from practice areas, and every step back to the parked airplane are all controlled in detail by someone other than the student pilot. Except for time in a few well-defined practice areas, every maneuver on ground and air is directed by someone else. For a student who never has to decide how to exit or enter a traffic pattern, or even coordinate with another airplane taxiing during most of their primary training, I'm beginning to see how they have so little skill in a non-towered environment. The only time they get away from the densely controlled airspace is that one trip to Marana or Ryan with an instructor before they're on their own to finish the solo cross-country time. I think this may be an important discussion and request to the flight schools and CFIs in the area that more time is direly needed to ensure students are competent outside the severely directed environment around Phoenix before they are sent on solo flights. Brian also shared for this presentation a couple of screenshots taken in June and September of this year, just to illustrate how condensed the traffic is. So why did we create this training video? So the three of us, Brian, Lee, and myself, decided to share some resources, free resources, that you can make available for extra training on this topic. We'll begin with the CFRs. 2 or 3 in particular pertain to non-towered air traffic procedures. First, we'll go over the right-of-way rules. All my CFRs I pick from the ecfr.gov website. This is updated weekly, and it has every CFR, even those not in the regular traditional FAR-AIM book. We'll begin with 91.113, the right-of-way rules for everything but water. When weather conditions permit, regardless of whether an operation is conducted under instrument flight rules or visual flight rules, vigilance shall be maintained by each person operating an aircraft so as to see and avoid other aircraft. When a rule of this section gives another aircraft the right of way, the pilot shall give way to that aircraft and may not pass over, under, or ahead of it unless well clear. We'll fast forward down to the landing portion of this reg. Aircraft while on final approach to land or while landing have the right of way over other aircraft in flight or operating on the surface, except that they shall not take advantage of this rule to force an aircraft off the runway surface, which has already landed and is attempting to make way for an aircraft on final. When 2 or more aircraft are approaching an airport for the purpose of landing, the aircraft at the lower altitude has the right of way, but it shall not take advantage of this rule to cut in front of another, which is on final approach to land, or to overtake that aircraft. Moving on to 91.126. This pertains with operating on or in the vicinity of an airport in Class Golf airspace. When approaching to land at an airport without an operating control tower in Class Golf, each pilot of an airplane must make all turns to the left, unless airport displays approved light signals or visual markings indicate that turns should be made to the right, in which case the pilot must make all turns to the right. This is important because unless otherwise authorized or required, each person operating an aircraft on or in the vicinity of an airport in Class Golf must comply with the requirements of this section. And just like this section, 91.127 refers to Class Echo airspace. Same thing. We'll turn now to another great resource, the AIM. The Aeronautical Information Manual, the AIM, is the FAA's official guide to basic flight information and air traffic control procedures. The AIM contains the basic aeronautical knowledge information required to fly in our national airspace. From the AIM, Chapter 4, Airport Operations Without Operating Control Tower. There is no substitute for alertness while in the vicinity of an airport. It is essential that pilots be alert and look for other traffic and exchange traffic information when approaching or departing an airport without an operating control tower. This is of particular importance since other aircraft may not have communication capability, or in some cases, pilots may not communicate their presence or intentions when operating into or out of such airports. To achieve the greatest degree of safety, it is essential that all radio-equipped aircraft transmit and receive on CTAF. The key to communicating at an airport without an operating control tower is selection of the correct common frequency. The acronym CTAF, which stands for Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, is synonymous with this program. A CTAF is a frequency designated for the purpose of carrying out airport advisory practices while operating to or from an airport without an operating control tower. The CTAF may also be a Unicom, Multicom, FSS, or tower frequency. You'll find this in the Aeronautical publications. Pilots of inbound traffic should monitor and communicate as appropriate on the designated CTAF from 10 miles to landing. Pilots of departing aircraft should monitor and communicate from startup, during taxi, and until 10 miles from the airport, unless CFRs or local procedures require otherwise. Pilots of aircraft conducting other than arriving or departing operations at altitudes normally used by arriving and departing aircraft should also monitor and communicate on the appropriate frequency while within 10 miles of the airport. Such operations might be parachute jumping, for example. I'll make a short plug here for Angel Flight West. We all know that the regs and the AIM and the advisory circular are minimum safety requirements. Nothing prohibits us from making those more safe. Here's an example. I fly as a command pilot for Angel Flight West because I decided to put my airplane to good use. And in their advisory to us, they recommend 20 miles, not 10, when we begin monitoring CTAF and listening and looking for other traffic. I'll show you now a diagram from the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, just to reiterate the standard traffic pattern that we mention here. The 6 legs, intended to create a logical, safe flow of traffic, with turns normally made to the left unless otherwise indicated. Here's the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, also free, off the FAA website. 2 chapters, very important to this discussion. Chapter 14, Airport Operations, and Chapter 15, Airspace. Like I said, all aircraft should monitor the CTAF when operating in the vicinity of non-towered airports. The CTAF frequency can be found on sectional charts in the U.S. Chart Supplement, formerly known as the AFD, AOPA's Airport Directory, Instrument Approach Charts, or others. Non-towered airports without an FSS generally have a Unicom. How do we find this free resource? I give you a screenshot of the FAA's Chart Supplement search box, and there you can see I've typed in Kilo Alpha Victor Quebec, which is Marana. Once you hit that, you'll see down here a PDF you can download to look at the chart supplement for Marana. Here it is. Down there on the left, you'll see the CTAF Unicom frequency 123.0. I also pulled up a screenshot from ForeFlight on my phone to show the C in a circle there, 123.0 for Marana. Let's jump now to the advisory circular on point for this topic. It is the Non-Towered Airport Flight Operations Advisory Circular 90-66 Bravo. This advisory circular calls attention to all the regulatory requirements, recommended operations, and communications procedures for operating at an airport without a control tower or an airport with a control tower that operates part-time. It begins with some very important definitions. The FAA believes that observance of a standard traffic pattern and use of CTAF, as detailed in this presentation, will improve the safety and efficiency of aeronautical operations at airports without operating control towers. Use of standard traffic patterns, like I mentioned earlier, should be to the left, and CTAF procedures by radio-equipped aircraft are required at all airports without operating control towers, unless otherwise indicated. It is recognized that other traffic patterns, the right turns, may be in use. If that's the case, they are noted by an RP designator followed by the applicable runway next to the airport symbol. The pilot in command's primary responsibility is to see and avoid other aircraft, and to help them see and avoid their aircraft. Keep lights and strobes on. The use of any traffic pattern procedure does not alter the responsibility of each pilot to see and avoid other aircraft. Pilots are also encouraged to participate in Operation Lights On, a voluntary program, a safety program described in the AIM. Unmanned aircraft, commonly known as drones or model aircraft, like manned aircraft, are also allowed to operate in Class Gulf airspace without specific ATC authorization and without required radio communications. The remote pilot in command and the UAS operator must always yield right-of-way to manned aircraft and not interfere with manned aircraft operations. Operators of UAS are required to obtain ATC authorization prior to operating in Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Surface Echo airspace. To achieve the greatest degree of safety, it is essential that all radio-equipped aircraft transmit and receive on CTAF. Pilots should use the correct airport name, as identified in the charts, when exchanging this traffic information to reduce the risk of confusion. To help identify one airport from another, the correct airport name should be spoken at the beginning and at the end of each self-announced transmission. Pilots clarify intentions if a communication sent by either their aircraft or another aircraft was potentially not received or misunderstood. And pilots limit the communications on CTAF to safety essential information regarding arrivals, departures, traffic flow, takeoffs and landings. The CTAF should not be used for personal conversations. Self-announce describes a procedure whereby pilots broadcast the call sign, the position, the altitude, and intended flight activity or ground operation. When referring to the specific runway, pilots should use the runway number and not the phrase active runway, because there is no active runway on a non-towered airport. Also, pilots are reminded that the use of the phrase, "Any traffic in the area, please advise," is not a recognized self-announced position and/or intention phrase and should not be used under any condition. Any traffic that is present at the time of your self-announcement that is capable of radio communications should reply without being prompted to do so. Aircraft arriving should be at traffic pattern altitude and allow for sufficient time to view the entire traffic pattern before entering. Entries into traffic patterns while descending may create collision hazards and should be avoided. Entry to downwind leg should be at a 45-degree angle, abeam the midpoint of the runway to be used for landing. The pilot may use discretion to choose an alternate type of entry, especially when intending to cross over midfield based upon the traffic and communication at the time of arrival. And I'll address this a little bit more for Marana coming up soon. Here's the diagram out of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. Now, I mentioned that Marana is a little bit different. If you look at the chart that Lee provided on the left, you'll see there are drop zones for parachute jumpers. Pilots should note that at some airports, overflying the field and performing midfield entries to the traffic pattern is unsafe. The AWOS at Marana announces, do not overfly the field, do not fly missed approach procedures for RNAV GPS 12 and RNAV GPS Echo approaches during parachute operations. because both the RNAV GPS-12 and RNAV GPS-ECHO missed approach procedures have trajectories that pass directly through the drop zone, as can overflying and midfield pattern entries. Always consult the chart supplement for more information here at Marana and at Pinal. Lee goes on, and I'm sharing this communication with you to give you examples of non-towered airports in Arizona that have parachute operations just like Marana. We have Buckeye Municipal, Bullhead City, Casa Grande, Coolidge, Cottonwood, Eloy, Kingman, Marana, and Pinal. At some airports, overflying the field and performing midfield entries to the traffic pattern is unsafe due to these parachute operations and even other activities. Always consult the U.S. chart supplements, charts, NOTAMs, AWOS, etc. for more information. In addition to the above resources, the FAA has a website with some best practices for airfield safety. I'm going to go over some of those for pilots. Encourage use of correct terminology and proper voice cadence. Eliminate distractions in the operational area. Obtain and use airport diagrams. Conduct clearing turns prior to entering any runway. Maintain a sterile cockpit when taxiing. Maintain appropriate taxi speed. Encourage pilots to have their eyes out when taxiing, and a heads-up policy also when taxiing. Attend safety seminars and programs. Improve safety by teaching, advocating, stressing, and understanding situational awareness. Customize runway safety presentations for targeted audiences, such as we're doing here. Cite specific airport runway safety web pages. Distribute runway safety materials to every aviation entity. Realize that every airport is unique, like I've shown you with Marana, and presents its own set of runway safety challenges. Stay alert, stay alive. Declare war on errors and make it everyone's responsibility. Another really great resource is AOPA. I belong to AOPA, as do my colleagues. AOPA pilots are hundreds of thousands strong. We span 75 countries and represent the largest aviation community in the world. The AOPA team, operating out of offices in Frederick, Maryland and Washington, D.C., exists to protect and to grow the incredible privilege that we call general aviation, and we're so blessed to be a part of. Whether it is through educating the public about the fun and the utility that aircraft can provide, preparing resources such as this one, operations at non-towered airports, and training material to enhance the skills of pilots everywhere, or advocating for aviation within government agencies, AOPA's job is to maintain the strength and vitality of our flying community. Lastly, I will close with some resources from our FAA safety team. They can be found on Faasafety.gov. In this one, in the library section, you'll see the Tucson Practice Areas document that outlines what I have just said, but in a little more detail. It goes over practice areas and other points that you should be aware of. This is Tucson Ryan. This is Marana. And that's Tucson International. We're going to close now with some words that Lee wrote for us all, a call to action for you. Please help by giving special attention to safe operations at non-towered airports whenever you are flight planning and flying, whenever a pilot is being trained and or evaluated by a CFI, DPE, chief pilot, chief flight instructor, check airman, and so forth, for progress checks, practical tests, wings, flight reviews, and airman currency checks. With safety concerns at non-towered airports, along with temporarily reduced hours of operation for towers across the country, knowing safe operating procedures at non-towered airports is especially timely, serving safety now and going forward. On behalf of my colleagues, Brian Stamper, Lee Unger, and myself, you've been watching Non-Towered Airports, in control or out of control, and I would like to thank you for your time and attention today.